the psalmist said in Psalm 104 verse 24, "O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your possessions." After the Carboniferous period came the Permian period of this Paleozoic era. Now, before we get into details, let's see those organisms or those animals that became extinct during this period. The trilobites, which had begun at the beginning of the Paleozoic era in the Cambrian period, became extinct in this period, the Permian period. Also, the armored fish, which began in the Silurian period, finally became extinct in the Permian period. The first fossils of this period were found at the foot of the Ural Mountains in the Russian province of Perm, from which the name Permian was derived. This period lasted approximately 50 million years. During the Permian period, tumultuous geological changes took place. There were volcanic eruptions. Here, like boom, those were the volcanic eruptions. The vast swamps of the Carboniferous period dried up and turned to land and then to mountains. Formed during this time were the Appalachian Mountains of eastern North America, which extended almost 2,000 miles from Quebec to Alabama. In Europe, the Urals were pushed to their maximum elevation. Signs of widespread glaciation at the beginning of the Permian period are shown by the presence of tillites in the southern hemisphere. A tillite deposit is made of sedimentary rock deposited and cemented together directly by the action of ice. Salt deposits were also formed when the seas retreated. The drastic changes in temperature, including dryness and glaciations, produced mass extinction of many animals and plants during this period. There is evidence in support of the theory that during the Permian period, all the continents were joined together. All the continents that we know today in the Permian period were joined together. The huge supercontinent that lay in the vast ocean was called Pangaea, meaning all lands. Many scientists believe that in time, the land masses that formed Pangaea began to separate. The drifting continents passed through many stages over a period of approximately 225 million years before taking the shapes and positions of the continents as we know them today. Permian plants were certainly different from the coal-forming ferns of the Carboniferous period. Plants that depended on a nearby supply of water for their survival died out in great numbers. Some became completely extinct. Only plants that could adapt to a climate of torrential rains alternating with long dry spells were able to survive. Plants that adapted well to the new era included the cycads, the conifers, and the hostils. Most of the seed ferns disappeared. The exception was the Glossopteris. Here, the Glossopteris, a seed fern that spread as far as Siberia and throughout the northern and southern hemispheres. Its leaves were shaped like human tongues. You see, it starts out broad and then it's pointed at the end, just like our tongues. While trilobites and armored fish were approaching their extinction, the first insects were developing through incomplete metamorphosis. The word metamorphosis means change. It refers to the changing stages of development in the life history of an insect. The characteristic stages of incomplete metamorphosis are egg, nymph, and adults. When the nymph hatches from the eggs, they are very similar to the adult insects. The nymphs may only lack wings and mature growth, but they live and sustain themselves in the same environment as the adult insects. The main disadvantage of incomplete metamorphosis is indeed the fact that both the young and the adults are dependent on the same habitat for their survival. They are actually in competition with each other. Despite this shortcoming, the cockroach, for example, has thrived to the present, while many insects that utilized incomplete metamorphosis became extinct. So be careful when you're killing your cockroaches. They've been around for very long and they've survived many hardships. During the Permian period, some insects began to acquire the benefit of complete metamorphosis, as we see here. Eventually, through millions of years of evolution, this developmental method was adopted by majority of insects. Complete metamorphosis consists of 4 distinct stages of development. We have the egg here, and then the larva, and then the pupa, and then the adult. So it's not incomplete anymore. We now have a 4-stage complete cycle, which many insects today adopt. The essential advantage of this type of development lies in the fact that the larvae and the adult insects lead entirely different lives. The larvae, for example, may live in the water while the adults may live on land. The adult insects, therefore, can never deprive their newly hatched young ones of food. Today, about 90% of all insects undergo complete metamorphosis. Land-dwelling amphibians were prevalent during the Permian period. The Eriops, one of the largest of the amphibians, could measure up to 6 feet in length, with short, strong legs and leathery skin. It was well adapted to life on land, much like our present-day alligator. Eriops most probably swam in the water and rested motionless on the muddy river banks while waiting for its prey to pass by. Its fossils are found in Texas today. The Myobotrachus, a tiny amphibian that measured about 3 inches, was an ancient relative of today's frog. Its head was long, wide, and blunt. It had large eyes. The hind legs were longer than the front legs. See the hind legs much longer than the front legs, and its tail was long and sturdy. The Cyclotosaurus over here, the Cyclotosaurus was the largest amphibian ever to live on land or in the water. It grew to an incredible length of 15 feet. It probably lived like our modern crocodile. Amphibians never really fully conquered life on land. Although they developed air-breathing lungs and strong legs, they still were very dependent on water. Many amphibians spend most of their time in the water, and even though they could survive stagnation and pollution, the variety of fish on which they fed could not. The survival of many amphibians was further threatened by the vulnerability of their soft-bodied eggs. When the soft eggs were deposited at the bottom of a lake or a pond, many were devoured soon after being laid. Even if a tadpole finally emerged, it was still in great danger of being eaten by fish and other amphibians before it could develop legs and lungs to venture out of water. With the Permian period becoming even hotter and drier than the Carboniferous, it became increasingly advantageous for an animal to develop life out of water. Ultimately, over millions of years, some more advanced amphibian-like animals developed the ability to lay eggs on land. These eggs had porous shells that protected the developing embryos while allowing them to breathe oxygen. Much like miniature self-contained ponds, these eggs were filled with fluid and had enough food for the embryos to develop legs and lungs before hatching. Eggs with shells proved to have enormous disadvantages over soft-bodied eggs that laid in water. These newly evolved animals were called reptiles. Now, reptiles mean animals that creep. Reptiles were better suited to survive the Permian period. Their skin was protected by scales or plates. They breathed air and did not have to return to water for breeding or laying eggs. The first reptiles must have appeared as early as the Devonian period. But geological changes were such that it is not easy today to trace the steps of the evolutionary mutations from amphibians to reptiles. Scientists must draw their conclusions from the observation of primitive reptiles that survived and left fossils in later periods. The Simuria presents a very interesting case in the fossil record because it had skeletal characteristics of both amphibians and reptiles. It is not known if it laid hard shells. Simuria was once thought to be the link between amphibians and reptiles, but it lived too late to be a direct ancestor of the reptiles. In any case, its mixture of characteristics clearly shows the gradual transition between these two groups. After much scientific controversy, Simoria is now generally classified as an amphibian. This carnivorous beast probably ate other small amphibians and reptiles, and perhaps even the large cockroaches. It had a thick body, very thick body, and a massive skull, and grew to a length of 2 feet. It is named for the town of Seymour, Texas, where its fossils were discovered. Currently, Hylonomus is recognized as the first true reptile, only about 1 foot long. It was related to modern turtles and tortoises. Its fossils were discovered inside a petrified, rotted out tree in Nova Scotia. The Labidosaurus was another primitive reptile. It was about 3 feet long. It originally lived in Europe, but later increased the number and roamed as far as Texas. The Dimetrodon, here, this big animal, the Dimetrodon, was a fierce carnivorous reptile that grew to a length of 11 feet. The bones of this early reptile were found in the common Permian rocks of Texas. To paleontologists, the purpose of the large-scale finback here is a mystery. So you see, scientists actually do not know everything. This mystery of the scaleback of the Dimetrodon is only known to God, who made it. Dimetrodon could not have used this fin for swimming, since it was a land animal. Some scientists suggest that the sail fin may have been a primitive means of controlling body temperature. This creature, like other reptiles, was cold-blooded, which means that the body temperature of the animal changed with the temperature of the environment. Therefore, the sail fin could have been used as a cooling fan in hot weather or a heater that absorbed the sun's rays in the winter. No living reptile has this sail-like fin. Modern reptiles simply move from place to place to avoid temperature extremes. Fossils also reveal something very unusual about Dimetrodon's teeth. You can see the teeth. Most reptiles had teeth all the same size, but Dimetrodon had large flesh-tearing canine teeth like those of a dog. In the history of the development of life, this is the first hint of a link between the reptiles and a new kind of animal about to emerge, a mammal. Another reptile with flesh-tearing dog-like teeth was Cynognathus. This creature had a large head with a small brain and a typical reptilian skeleton with sturdy legs well positioned under its body. So it was not by its side, it was under its body. Cynognathus was able to keep its belly off the ground. This allowed the animal to rapidly pursue its prey or scurry quickly away from its enemies. So we have come to the end of the Paleozoic era, from the Ordovician period to the Silurian period the Devonian period, the Carboniferous period, and the Permian period. This was the end of the Paleozoic water, or the age of ancient life. We'll be moving next to our next era, not a period but a new era entirely from the Paleozoic era in our next period.